Hello, this is Joe Simhart back after a bit of an illness, but I'm going to talk today about something that is occurring to me since this assault on the Capitol by rioters, and it's called cognitive dissonance, and Q. We're going to start by talking about this lady, which you probably never heard of, Sister Thedra. This is one of the newsletters associated with her group or cult, and it's called A Call to Arms, and the group is the Association of Sananda and Sanat Kumaris. This is kind of an obituary. She lived from 1900 to 1992. She became famous in the 60s as a channeler for a being called Sananda, the Christ, and then for Sanat Kumaris, one of the Ascended Masters that came out of the Blavatsky tradition. And what set her apart a little bit was she was one of the earlier people to claim that this was connected with some kind of a UFO brotherhood, the brothers that were up there in spaceships. Sananda is another word for Christ, or the Christ. And so it says here that she began her work over 40 years ago, which meant 40 years before 1992. She began transcribing and releasing the teachings which were being given to her to help the sleeping populace begin to awaken. At the time, many considered what she was saying to be tantamount to blasphemies, and some went to very great lengths to try to silence her. She continued to believe in this channeling and messaging until the end of her life. There was a foundation set up in Arizona at the end. But Sister Thedra, Dorothy Martin, was made famous by a study in the 50s that looked into her small fledgling cult at the time. The study was done by researchers Leon Festinger, Henry Rieken, and Stanley Schachter, and the book that they published in '57 is called When Prophecy Fails. Now, what they were doing was looking at a group that totally believed that the end of the world was coming, a great flood was coming, and the messages were coming through Dorothy Martin, or in the book, Mrs. Keach. They disguised the group. The observers were noticing that the group was getting ready for the end of the world, so to speak, and they would go out and wait for signals to come, and signals didn't come. They would go back and regroup, and she would come up with new prophecies. So the end of the world obviously didn't come, but the group remained together for the most part. Some defected, and she continued this belief system. What the researchers noticed was that when people have strong beliefs, and this is what they were testing, that if disconfirming evidence appeared, rather than change their minds, they would go back and rationalize and double down, so to speak, regarding their beliefs. So, even though a cult leader might be exposed in the press and even thrown in jail, the cult members will double down and rationalize and reinforce their beliefs because, number one, it's very painful to change your mind, and number two, it takes a lot of effort to clean up the mess in your brain that occurred during the years of true belief. And people don't want to face that, and that's called cognitive dissonance. And I went through this myself. I've talked about it, I've written about it. I went through a lot of pain and anxiety when I was trying to change my beliefs in this group, Church Universal and Triumphant and Theosophy. It took a lot of struggle. It's not easy. I've worked with a lot of people over the years, helping them with this kind of transition. I've watched them struggle. I've watched them have headaches. I've watched them almost throw up when they have to realize, or when they realize that they have to change their mind. It is not easy. So, when you're seeing groups like QAnon and the Trump supporters, the rabid Trump supporters, do something like assault the Capitol, these are true believers. And they're doubling down as Republicans are finally saying, I have enough of this. The cognitive dissonance is too much. I'm bailing on Trump. And now the true believers are calling those people traitors and assaulting them, and meaning Mike Pence, Lindsey Graham, anyone else that seems to be coming back to their senses regarding Trump are now considered traitors and evil and whatever's going on. Part of the deep state, in other words. The story in Prophecy Fails is reiterated in this fiction book by Alison Lurie that came out, in 1967. It's called Imaginary Friends. And what Alison does is very cleverly create a fiction upon a fiction, because the study fictionalizes the group. It doesn't name who they're really studying. And her hero in this book is Tom McCann, who's researching this group and kind of gets caught up in it, which happens. Sociologists sometimes study native tribes or cults or whatever, and they can get caught up in it. It's called going native. When you start to believe in the group that you first disbelieved in, when you're curious and just studying them, and suddenly it all starts making sense, and then you convert, now you're going native. And this is a danger that young sociologists are taught to try to avoid, and how to avoid that when they're doing research. Some of these bizarre belief systems can be very compelling. I just heard of a woman who was in her late 70s, was a college professor, married to the same guy who was also a professor for 60 some years, at least right now anyway. She got caught up in the Q ideology about 4 years ago and is totally into it now. Her husband, they live together, but they can't talk. They cannot talk about politics. It has become that divisive. So true belief is very powerful. It's very difficult to change your mind once you've entered into those kinds of contracts. It's kind of like my painting up here. It's a fishbowl that's advertising for fish to come inside because there's food and it's safe. And then this is kind of like the same idea of QAnon. Come into this world. We have the right information. You're going to find what you need. We're going to feed you. And we will set up a barrier between you and that deep state, that false world out there. And meanwhile, you get caught in this fishbowl and you're swimming around it and swimming around it and thinking you're safe and thinking you're wonderful and thinking you're knowledgeable. And meanwhile, you're in a shrunken world and you're not free to roam as average fish do in the waters. So, if you want to learn about cognitive dissonance and what's happening to Trumpsters and Trump believers right now, the pain they're going through when they're trying to change their minds about their so-called leader, read When Prophecy Fails. And if you want to read it in a more entertaining way, read Imaginary Friends. And I think you'll learn quite a bit. Thank you for listening. Have a good day and goodbye.